I now give the floor to His Excellency Nicola Renzi, Minister for Foreign and Political Affairs and Justice of San Marino.
Madam President, Secretary General, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Government of the Republic of San Marino, I would like to congratulate Her Excellency Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garcés on her election as President of the 73rd Session of the UN General Assembly, and to wish her fruitful work. Her long experience, both as Ecuador's ambassador to the United Nations and as Minister of Foreign Affairs, as well as her deep knowledge of the organization, are valuable resources for the United Nations. The Republic of San Marino, which this year has taken on the role of Vice President of the General Assembly, supports the priorities of her agenda, as set out in her inaugural speech, and believes that these are important to give a fundamental impetus to the necessary reforms concerning the most important areas of the UN's activity. The San Marino delegation will ensure you, Madam President, its utmost collaboration during all the work of the General Assembly. I would also like to express my country's gratitude to the outgoing President, His Excellency Miroslav Lajčák, for the important work carried out during the 72nd session. My country would also like to extend its special thanks to Secretary General His Excellency Antonio Guterres for his energy and determination in leading the United Nations and in the reform processes of the organization. Madam President, the theme chosen for this session, Making the United Nations Relevant to All People, Global Leadership and Shared Responsibilities for Peaceful, Equitable and Sustainable Societies, is undoubtedly of great relevance. It gives Member States the opportunity to contribute constructively to the work of the General Assembly. There is a strong correlation between the two concepts that make up the subject of the debate. On the one hand, while the United Nations must be closer to its citizens by translating the fundamental principles of its global action into concrete results, it is essential, on the other hand, not only to defend, but also to strengthen international cooperation and our organization. Recent developments in the global socio-political landscape have created obstacles to the development of multilateralism and are putting it at risk. Today, in consideration of the magnitude of global challenges, their increasingly evident interrelationships, the need for member states to work together to overcome difficulties, it is more and more essential to adopt an approach towards common and coordinated policies. In one word, multilateralism. The Republic of San Marino has decided to cooperate within the framework of international structures and mechanisms, at the top of which is undoubtedly the United Nations, because it believes in the strength of dialogue, democracy, and respect for others. Indeed, the very peaceful coexistence of peoples relies on such values. My country believes that the United Nations must increase its leadership role in the management of global governance due to its deeply democratic nature, its universal participation, and undisputed legitimacy. The cultural diversity and traditions represented within the United Nations are not an obstacle, but rather an enormous asset which makes it possible to adopt an approach reconciling the interests of the international community, so as to attain human and sustainable development. We cannot ignore the fact that in recent years, other fora, such as the G20, have and are exerting a great influence at the global level in the management of global governance. San Marino is grateful to these informal groups for the role that they have played. However, in their decision-making process, these groups should be more transparent and inclusive, and should take into account the interests, concerns, and aspirations of the countries that are excluded, in particular those of developing countries. The action of these informal groups must not be in competition with, but complementary to that of the United Nations. Trust, inclusiveness, and dialogue are essential elements in support of multilateralism and its ability to produce concrete results at the global level. Madam President, this year's theme is inevitably linked to the UN reform process. This process is of fundamental importance for the future world balance, for guaranteeing international peace and security, and must remain at the center of all of our efforts. The reforms must make the structures of the organization functional to the objectives of its global action. The credibility and authoritativeness of the United Nations depend on its ability to transform objectives into concrete actions that have a real and measurable impact on people's lives. The United Nations must be closer to its citizens, communicate better, and show them the importance and effectiveness of multilateral collaboration for the lives of all of us and all citizens. In this regard, the Republic of San Marino reiterates its support to the reform agenda that Secretary General Antonio Guterres is implementing in the fields of peace and security, management, and the UN development system. We are confident that these reforms will improve the UN's contribution to sustainable development, will ensure greater effectiveness in the resolution of armed conflicts, in the search for sustainable peace, and ultimately will strengthen the UN system's ability to produce more concrete and visible results. Madam President, the Republic of San Marino expresses its concern about the increasing number of conflicts in many parts of the world, and supports the coordinated action of the United Nations in the field of peace-building and peacekeeping. Religious radicalism, terrorism, transnational organized crime, trafficking in drugs and human beings, weapons of mass destruction, violent extremism, marginalization, and exclusion pose all a threat to international peace and security. It is essential to analyze the root causes of conflicts if we want to favor disarmament and de-radicalization. At the same time, we need to promote, through education, respect for and promotion of human rights, the rule of law, and access to justice. The United Nations has often been criticized in recent years for the inability of the Security Council to intervene adequately in Syria and other conflict situations. Unfortunately, this has undermined the credibility of our organization. The Republic of San Marino hopes that the Security Council will now be able to fulfill its mandate effectively. In this regard, and in order to support a rapid and decisive action of the Security Council, I am pleased to recall that my country has joined the Code of Conduct drawn up by the ACT group to refrain from using the veto in cases of crimes such as genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. San Marino has also joined the joint proposal by France and Mexico for voluntary suspension of the veto by the permanent members of the Security Council. In pursuing the goals of peacemaking and sustainable peace, the United Nations must promote a strategic partnership in which governments, the United Nations system, international, regional, and sub-regional organizations, civil society, the private sector, and universities work together to achieve common goals. The relationship between peace and development is clear. There can be no sustainable development without peace, just as there can be no peace without sustainable development. In this regard, the implementation of the 2030 Agenda becomes essential for the construction of inclusive, resilient, and peaceful societies. 3 years have passed since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda. The international community is working hard to make the Sustainable Development Goals come true. While, on the one hand, progress has been made in the implementation of some goals and targets, on the other hand, it should be noted that there are strong inequalities in the implementation of the agenda, not only between countries but also within them. The Republic of San Marino underlines the central role played by the high-level political forum in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, thanks to its follow-up activity. In this context, San Marino supports the ministerial declaration that was adopted this year by the Forum. Madam President, the most difficult and important challenge to the achievement of the objective of sustainable development is the eradication of poverty in all of its forms and dimensions, in particular, extreme poverty. Although the level of extreme poverty has fallen significantly in the last 10 years, as shown by the data contained in the Secretary-General's report on the SDGs, nevertheless, poverty remains the main cause of hunger, and the number of undernourished people reached 815 million in 2016. The agenda emphasizes universal respect for human rights and human dignity, peace, justice, equality, and non-discrimination are fundamental rights whose implementation becomes essential for the construction of inclusive societies. The principle according to which no one should be left behind requires the adoption of specific measures to support people in vulnerable situations. The 2030 Agenda takes into account the needs of children, young people, people with disabilities, the elderly, indigenous people, refugees, displaced persons, migrants, people living in areas affected by humanitarian emergencies or in situations of armed conflict. Respect for cultural and ethnic diversity, as well as equal opportunities, are central to the full realization of human potential. The promotion of actions in support of children and young people is a key element, since they must grow up free from all forms of abuse and exploitation. Unfortunately, children pay a very high price in areas of armed conflict. Many lose their lives, are kidnapped, raped, used as a shield, or recruited as soldiers. Moreover, their schools are often destroyed, as are their hospitals, depriving them of their fundamental rights. My country which is part of the group of friends of the CAAC, believes that international humanitarian laws and human rights laws must be respected in conflict situations. San Marino has ratified the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, on the involvement of children in armed conflicts, and it supports the Paris commitments. Moreover, this year San Marino has added its name to the list of countries supporting the Safe Schools Declaration, an important tool for the protection of educational facilities from military use during conflicts. Only with the effective and full participation of women in decision-making processes that have a direct impact on their lives will it be possible to build sustainable, resilient, and inclusive societies. The Republic of San Marino reaffirms its commitment to the fight against all forms of violence based on gender, as well as all forms of sexual abuse and exploitation. The objective of gender equality, emancipation of women and girls, and full realization of their human rights must be achieved. Gender equality must also be translated into equality in educational opportunities, with particular regard to scientific subjects, because technology, science, and innovation in general play a vital role in meeting global challenges and, hence, in the promotion of sustainable development. At the same time, and the Republic of San Marino is particularly convinced of this, the perception of sustainable development through new technologies, science, and innovation must be transmitted through means of communication that do not distort the truth, so as not to undermine the very concept of freedom. The Republic of San Marino, in this regard, is offering a concrete and motivated contribution, also at international level, to the theme of correct information, with the objective of combating the increasingly dangerous phenomenon of fake news, which is deceptive, uncontrolled, and able to incite hatred and nurture prejudices. The commitment of the international community must be directed towards all vulnerable groups, without exception. People with disabilities and the elderly, for example, must be guaranteed full participation in social, economic, and cultural life. Madam President, the effects of climate change are one of the greatest challenges of our time because of their unprecedented impact on our lives, and in particular on the lives of the poorest and most vulnerable. At 1.1 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, 2017 was one of the hottest 3 years of all time. The effects of climate change do not respect national borders. They spread everywhere, in every country and continent. They are increasingly damaging national economies, communities, and countries. This is a global problem that requires solutions that need to be coordinated globally. Moreover, it is essential to strengthen international cooperation in order to help developing countries to move towards a low-emission economy. The Republic of San Marino recognizes the deep synergy between the implementation of the Paris Agreement on Climate Change and the 2030 Agenda, and welcomes the recent entry into force of the agreement. Events related to climate change, such as drought, which generates food and water shortages, have increased competition to have access to these and other natural resources. Conflicts are a major cause of food insecurity. As a result, about 74 million people today are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. The number of conflicts has increased over the last decade and has led to the displacement of millions of people. In 2017, 68 million people were forced to leave their homes. In addition to persecution and armed conflicts, natural disasters such as floods, earthquakes, and hurricanes, partly due to the effects of climate change, have forced millions of people to seek refuge in other countries. Other disasters, such as socio-economic deprivations, the lack of food, water, education, and health, have led millions of people to seek their fortune elsewhere. All of this has contributed to the increase in migratory flows, a major challenge that the international community has been facing for some years. San Marino has followed the intergovernmental negotiations that led at the end of July to the finalization of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, which will be formally adopted in December during the Intergovernmental Conference in Morocco. Given its transnational nature, no country can face the migration phenomenon on its own. The Compact strengthens the universality of human rights, including those of migrants, their dignity, regardless of their status, access to basic rights, and their protection. Its objective is not to stop migration, but to manage it in the best possible way through strengthened international cooperation. My country believes that the implementation of the Compact will bring greater security, order, and economic progress for the benefit of all. The Global Compact is a clear example of what multilateralism can do, of its potential and importance. Similarly to the recent 2030 Agenda, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. Indeed, through tangible measures aimed at financing development, the Compact lays the foundations for a global plan of action. Madam President, in order to face today's world challenges, we need a renewed commitment to multilateralism. This is only possible through a strong United Nations organization, capable of coordinating in an effective way our economic, environmental, and social policies at a global, regional, and local level. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate the strong support of the Republic of San Marino to all initiatives aimed at implementing the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the Minister for Foreign and Political Affairs and Justice of San Marino for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Alan Peter Cayetano, Secretary for Foreign Affairs of the Philippines.